And then I can't remember, is this also being recorded or just live on YouTube?
Live on YouTube.
Okay. Okay, and I think everyone is here except for Commissioner Levin.
Great. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first meeting of the Zoning Subcommittee for the Salem Project. I'm Eunice Kim, Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Salem, and there's a lot of folks here with me tonight. I'll let you introduce yourselves, Lisa, Norm, Austin.
Sure. Lisa Anderson will be the Planning Administrator for the City of Salem.
Norman Wright, Community Development Director for the city.
I'm Austin Ross, Long Range Planner with the city.
So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Will you let me know if it's working? Oh no, now I lost a picture of everybody. Well, I can't see y'all. Hopefully you can see me.
I can't see you. And Zachary didn't introduce himself.
Oh, Zachary, I'm sorry.
Staff person.
Oh, sorry. I'm Zachary Cardosa. I'm an admin analyst with Community Development.
Great. Well, again, I'm sorry I can't see you. My computer's doing something funny, but I'm glad you can see the presentation. So today we are going to be talking about 6 specific zoning options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I'll walk through everything and explain it all. We're going to first kind of start though with a project overview to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of where we are in the project, what the project is. And then we'll walk through those 6 zoning options. There's a lot to get through. If we don't get through all of it, that's okay. We do want to make sure that we leave time for public comment. There are 4 people signed up. So at some point, even if we're still in discussion, I think it's important that we stop and let the comments occur, and then we'll talk about next steps. So Council President Hoy is the chair of this subcommittee. And what we're going to be asking the subcommittee at the end of all of this, we do have 3 meetings scheduled so far. If we have to add another, we will. But at the end of this, we're going to be asking you all to vote to make a recommendation on these zoning options. And then we will carry those forward through the public adoption process. So public hearings at the Planning Commission and the City Council, when we take the whole package of our Salem amendments, the comprehensive plan, the zoning code, the zoning map, through the adoption process at the end of the year. So we will be asking for a formal vote at the end of all of this. So as a reminder, we are working on the Salem Project, which is a multi-year project to update the comprehensive plan. As you all know, this is kind of the large framework that really guides how we grow and develop in the future. Impacts everything from housing to transportation to economic development. And so it's really, again, that big framework that will guide how we grow in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we hit a major milestone last month where we brought a vision document to the council and asked for acceptance. It wasn't a formal adoption process. It was just making sure that we were headed in the right direction. We had the right framework at a high level to keep moving forward with the project. Council did accept that vision, which we were excited about. That vision included high-level goals for housing, economic development, the environment, natural resources, transportation, as well as a proposed comprehensive plan map. But at that time, when we brought the vision document to the council, we did want to present 6 zoning options that really are intended to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from transportation. And so again, we presented those at the time because we know that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a priority in the community. It's a priority for the city and for the council. The council set a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And so while we took that goal and we put it into the Salem vision and we plan to advance that through the update of the comprehensive plan, we know it's not enough just to put the goal in the document. We actually have to take steps as a city to move in that direction. So one of the ways that we plan to do this as a city, we're all working on the climate action plan. There's a lot of strategies that are coming out of that plan, and we're collaborating with them. I'm on the task force, and so I have the privilege of really seeing kind of the inner workings of what's going on in the discussions. And a lot of the strategies do have to do with land use and transportation, and so we're very much aligned on that. You'll see a strategy, for example, about concentrating kind of mixed use compact development and access to transit. But a lot of other strategies have to do with other things, whether it's EV charging or our environment or just a whole host of strategies, SDCs, system development charges. So we are coordinating on that. But we do know that the majority, at least over half of our emissions from the city are from our transportation. So we did a greenhouse gas inventory as part of the first phase of the Salem project, and these were the results. And so we know that how our city develops, the land use patterns and the transportation patterns, how that develops all impacts that number 53% you see on the screen. And so we do think it's important to do what we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by making changes at the zoning level. So the state has been working on this for a long time. The Oregon statewide transportation strategy, which I think was adopted in 2018, has a lot of strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through land use patterns, transportation system improvements, fuel technologies, for example. And I just wanted to put this clip up here. One of the strategies is to really focus on compact mixed-use development. And I highlighted this area that's on the screen. That's really about making sure that uses are close together so that people can effectively get to them, like biking, walking, transit, and making sure that mix of uses is near transit. We know that land use alone is not enough to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. We do need to make improvements to the transportation system, for example, to support mixed use. But we're really focused today on that zoning and on that land use. So with our vision document, we did move towards that direction in terms of adding mixed use land along our core network. So Chariot's core network is this kind of darker black line you see on the screen. And these are areas where our transit system, our transit district has committed to keeping and increasing service. So you'll see it along Commercial, Lancaster, Market, Portland Road, again, all those dark lines. And we have used that to plan around it. So a lot of the mixed use that we're proposing to add, that bright pink, about 1,700 acres we're planning to add, are along that core network. So we'll be talking a lot about that core network today and any changes we want to make in terms of the development that happens in that area. In addition, we are adding neighborhood hubs throughout the city, and I'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So the question really is, we've created a lot of this potential if the map is adopted at the end of the day for mixed use development along the core network. But the way we've always talked about mixed use in the city really has been about flexibility and allowing for residential development, allowing for commercial, office, retail, or allowing for a mix. The question today is really, are we going to push more towards actually promoting housing in near transit and near services? So that's just something we want to kind of keep in mind as we walk through those zoning options today. So these are the 6 zoning options that we presented to the council and that we'll be walking through today. Again, if we have time to get through them all. So I will walk through each one. Don't feel like you need to memorize this slide. So for each zoning option, we are going to present what we mean by that option at a very high level. We're still at a very high level because we are trying to understand from this committee to what extent do you want us to pursue these? Do you want us to dive in the details and actually move these forward? We will then answer your questions that you have about each one. And then we're going to do some polling. We're going to ask after each topic that we present, if we were to move forward with this, how would you want it to be refined? And then we will be asking you, generally, do you want to move forward with this? After we have public comment, we think it's important that you hear from the comment, and there's been some written testimony as well submitted. We will ask you again, do you want to pursue these options? Because I think it's important, maybe some of the testimony will change your mind perhaps. All of the information from today will be used, none of it's binding. It's just to help inform as we move forward, what do we advance? What do we spend our time really digging into? And what do you want us to bring back at the next meeting? So maybe it's all of them. Oh, was there a question?
Sorry, Eunice, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
About the order there.
Yes.
It seems like we're going to be answering the polling questions kind of in a vacuum, and it seems like we left out any discussion. Like I would want to hear, I would want to have a conversation and just maybe think about and talk about some of the things that you present with the other people on the committee before I were to answer a poll. Otherwise, it's like we're all doing it in a vacuum and we don't have the benefit of each other's wisdom or perspective.
Yes, no, and I apologize. I probably should have put questions and discussion.
Okay.
So after we present, that will be the discussion. If you have questions or you want to talk about it before the voting, absolutely. That is the whole point of this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. So if you've joined us, I don't know, for our weekly policy meetings that we've been having on our Salem project, we've been doing some polling, and this is kind of how we're going to be trying to get some of your input. It's anonymous. You can join on your phone or on your computer on a web browser, and hopefully you had a chance to try this out. The questions will automatically change, so don't worry about that. But we want to test it out before we started to kind of dive in. So I can't see the chat right now, but if someone could also put that in the chat or let us know, and we can then help you out. Just want to give everyone a chance to vote. Is it working for you? Yes or no? And it'll just be the committee, so there should be only up to 8 votes. So staff's not voting.
I voted before the meeting, but it didn't ask me to log in. I just voted. Did I have to log in somehow?
I just clicked on the link that Shelby sent out and it allowed me to go in immediately. Yeah.
That's what I did too.
Okay, so maybe you're the 2 that already voted. Okay. Are others able to vote?
I just voted.
A link. It says
No
Shelby
link?
sent a link for that. Oh, the poll. I see it here. Okay.
I got in unison. I got your response back.
On the text, great. Yeah, there's an automatic text that comes back if you're on your phone. And there's an app as well if you wanted to download that. So it's
Eunice, this is Virginia. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I have this number already in my phone because of the meetings that I've gone to with you before. Do I need to
Yes.
retext the ECAM 847? Okay.
Yes, because it's a new code we created just for this meeting, so that it was just us voting. Yeah.
Sorry for the repetitive.
No, that's okay. You have been at our meetings and you've been voting, which has been great. Okay, so we're at 5. I think there's going to be 7 of us.
Not me yet. Hold on.
Okay, no problem. That's why we're doing a practice.
You might want to revote because it told me to vote again when I went back to the browser window, even though I had already voted.
I think I'm doing it wrong, but that's kind of standard for me. This is a technology-based interface, so.
Are you on your phone texting or are you?
Yeah, I think I clicked the wrong button somewhere. I'm trying to join a presentation. I don't know how to go back.
No, you're probably in it then. Did you get a text back?
I got the text back.
Yep, that's it. Now if you put in A.
But I don't have that option.
You just do it in your phone. You just text the A.
Okay.
And then the A will show up, or you text B and the B will show up.
What's my username? I'm into the poll join presentation and it's got the.
That's where I was.
Yeah. Do I just put my name?
You can put that, but it's going to be anonymous. So.
So I text in the.
Do you want to text A or text B?
It won't. I tried that. Didn't work. It's saying A only works after you've joined a presenter session. And it says text your presenter's keyword to join and try again.
Okay, so you want to text EKIM 847 and text it to the number 22333.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's.
Oh.
It says my username is not found. Presenter not found.
Another
Austin?
option is just to
There we
click
go.
that link.
Oh, you're in?
Maybe.
Okay, 6 and 1. That's 7.
I'm not in yet though.
What? Who's the extra?
Does it show me?
It shows that there's 7 because
Okay, well then maybe I'm in, but then I'm trying to join the presentation with the pollev.com / and ask for the username. I put in my username, it said presenter not found. But
maybe put in EKIM 847. Maybe it's
Right,
asking
it's
for
asking
that.
for Eunice's username.
It's asking for me then.
EKIM
EKIM 847.
847.
So sorry, everyone.
Oh, okay, now I'm in. Yes, yay! I did it.
Wait, I
Okay.
don't know who the extra votes are.
Boom.
Okay, we're just gonna move on. Okay, so the first zoning option is about increasing heights along the core network. This is a map of the core network. The gray is the core network. And we're particularly looking at we're proposing a new mixed use zone. It's a mixed use 3, and we'll show you a map of where we're proposing it. But the intent of this is essentially to allow for more housing, taller buildings, right, near transit. So it is very much focused on the core network. In most of the places where we are proposing the mixed use 3, it is currently CR, commercial retail. It's the red you see on this map. And the maximum height today is 50 feet. As just kind of a reference, we have other maximum heights. So our newer mixed use zones, the mixed use 1 and 2, have different heights. One's 55, one's 65, unless you're adjacent to historic, then you're 45. So we're trying to really understand where we've put a lot of this new mixed use 3 land, what should the height be? If we were to stick with the commercial retail, it would be 50 feet. But we have an opportunity, obviously, we're creating a new zone to make a new height. So where we're proposing the mixed use 3, you'll see is largely along the core network, down Commercial, Portland Road, Little on Market, Lancaster, some kind of centers and intersections on Liberty. So these are kind of the areas we're thinking about. Again, most of these areas are currently commercial retail that have a 50-foot height limit.
Eunice, can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask questions whenever. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Can you give us just a visual, like how many floors?
I'm going to. Yep.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, so here's a visual. One is the waterfront, or the old Boise South waterfront area. And at the highest, this is 5 stories, it's 63. At the kind of other roof line, it's closer to 57, 60. And this other one is Broadway Commons. At the highest, kind of that peaked roof architectural feature is 57, but otherwise it's 54. Does that help, Ashley? Or was that Virginia?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Okay. So there are also obviously other considerations. We can't just think of height in a vacuum. And so when we've talked a lot about height in the past, when we created the mixed use 1 and 2 zones, there was a lot of concern about the impacts on abutting or adjacent residential areas. And so what we did is we created setbacks that were based on the height. So as buildings got taller, they had to be further away. Generally in the mixed use zones, we don't have any other setbacks for buildings. So if you're next to commercial, you're next to mixed use, you can build right up to the property line. But because of the concern we heard from neighborhoods that largely were single family, we put in this kind of setback. So that's just something I want to kind of make clear, that obviously there are impacts to increasing heights beyond just allowing more housing. Oh, and so we don't really get buildings that are like kind of stair step. That was just kind of an illustration. So if a building based on the mixed use 1 zone was, say, 55 feet high, and we did that step back, it'd be like 70 feet away from the property line. So there are also trade-offs to having a setback like that, because the taller buildings then are pushed to the street, which is fine in terms of maybe urban design, but you are losing a lot of land that you could have otherwise developed. And I should have said, so with the climate action plan, one of the strategies that is going to be analyzed through the cost benefit analysis is looking at removing setbacks in zones to allow for more development. We're going to be working with the consultant team and staff on really understanding what that means. Is it really every zone's not going to have a setback, and that's what we're testing? But just for kind of baseline information, we don't have any setbacks for buildings in the mixed use 1 and 2 today, unless it's next to residential. So this is kind of the first question. If we were to move forward with increasing heights beyond the 15 feet, generally, how are you feeling? So we have a no max. Our downtown does not have a maximum height. That's obviously kind of our most intense development that happens there. But in other areas, we do have maximum heights. So this is not binding in any way. We're just trying to understand where you're feeling in terms of heights. So this is kind of the question. If we were to move forward, where are you generally feeling more comfortable with? And then the next question will actually be, do you want us to actually pursue this and look further into it?
So we're voting now?
Yeah, I meant to say, yeah, we should actually, going back to Hoy's point, let's talk about it first. Sorry about that. Are there other questions?
Well, yeah, this is interesting. I have not been able to follow the Salem Climate Action Plan, in terms of what data do we have and what kind of, data-driven decisions have led to this point so that we can know what we're actually voting on. Like, what's the real world impact of doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we still just in we're not sure because we're collecting that data and we need to know what the community would actually, even consider? I mean, where are we at in this process?
We're closer to the second. We're
Okay.
kind of at the very high level. So the Climate Action Plan is not going to model all of the different strategies. I think there was like over 200 strategies. The only one related to really land use code is removing all setbacks. And I think they are going to analyze that one, kind of the cost benefit analysis in terms of reducing GHG emissions. When we tried to do modeling when it came to reducing greenhouse gas emissions related to transportation through our Salem, the vision portion, that model is not very sensitive to land use changes. And so we don't actually anticipate reusing that model to kind of test these things. It just is not, it does not really prove to show much change. We do know, kind of based on all the research, again, the Oregon transportation system and our strategy and what's been done in other places, that concentrating or at least promoting mixed use kind of compact development does reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right? But in terms of testing each one of these, like does 55 feet versus 70 feet make much of a difference in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Like that level of detail, I highly unlikely would show any sort of impact in terms of the transportation modeling that we've been able to do.
And thank you, Eunice. That actually makes sense. Just a follow-up question. I don't think that's even my question. My question's more upstream, but it's similar. It's like, is this concept of what we're talking about, like this topic of like higher heights, how much data is there that helps? I mean, I assume that there is data that shows that this helps, but just perspective, like, is this, of the 5 or 6 things we're discussing today, do we know where it ranks compared to the other topics?
I think, Councillor Phillips, we do know that allowing people to build higher allows them to, spread the cost of the development across more units that they can rent or space that they can lease, right? So we did do a feasibility analysis when we created these MU1 and MU2 zones in State Street to look at that for the analysis of height. And, if you are already putting a certain amount of money for this type of like a mixed use building construction costs, there are certain fixed costs. Elevators are expensive, right? That's why most of our apartments are 3-story walk up, because the elevator cost and the type of construction once you go above 3 stories. But if someone's, going to do that type of development, allowing them to add an extra floor and get, 12 more apartment units or 20 more apartment units that they can rent brings down the overall cost of that development. But I do, I will say that not all these buildings will be mixed use. I don't want to give that impression because these zones potentially won't require housing, they'll allow it. So from that perspective, we do know that not having what might be an artificial cap on height can just allow more opportunities for folks when they're building. And then obviously allowing people to use more of the land, whether it's up or wide, wider with less setbacks or less parking, or higher, just gives more development potential for any particular parcel, which is why it's one of the strategies, it's one of the things that cities do when they want urban form. So that's why downtown, we don't have any setbacks, parking or height restrictions. But it's also generally a strategy in areas where you want to have a denser mixed use. You want to eliminate those restrictions that can make it harder to develop. I don't know if you just wanted to add anything.
Thank you.
No, I thought that was great.
Trevor, I can also tell you just in terms of the public perspective, and I don't know where the overall city would be, but one of the most vociferous groups that we've ever heard from since I've been on city council is when we attempted to raise the maximum height on the State Street corridor. And that's why we ended up with that sort of separate height when you're next to a historic district. Because they came out quite vociferously about that. So I do know there are some opinions about that with when it abuts a neighborhood. But a lot of these that I'm seeing don't really, they're a much different scenario than what we were looking at there at State Street.
Councilor Griggs, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did.
Commissioner Griggs, sorry.
I think it would be an easier vote to say, if you're going to be in favor of higher buildings heights and like even 70 feet, may we assume that there would still be some setbacks, even though I know that's a separate conversation, because that makes a difference. It made a huge difference on the Court Street discussion. So can we assume for this voting purpose that setbacks would still be in place?
Yeah, or you could just let us know that, right? That, we're okay with going higher as long as there is a certain setback.
Depending on where it is.
And then we
as
could,
Councilor Horry said, in some areas, it's not going to, the setback won't be an issue. Some areas it will be. So I think it has to be very fine tuned to the area.
And then we could bring that back at the next meeting and say, this is generally what we think the setback should be if we land on a height of 70 feet or wherever we land.
Okay.
We'll kind of refine as we go through these meetings for sure. Any other kind of questions?
Commissioner Pollack has one.
Oh, great. Sorry, I can't see everyone. Thank you.
So I agree that anytime you get near a residential or the historical district, you're going to have big issues on the height. But we also had an issue on an old church that was revised, downtown, and it was in, a multifamily area, and the neighborhood agreed to the original zone classification, but then came back and attacked the height when half of them agreed. So, the height issue is going to be really, really contentious with all those residential. And I understand if it's abutting residential, but the higher you get and the more that you have to, because of the shadow effect near residential along those corridors, exactly. I think you're losing a lot of the effect of the the mixed use area. It's going to be I think when you get community comment, this is going to be one big bone of contention. I think to say no max would be really that vagueness is really not going to fly. But I think Commissioner or President Griggs is right. A setback along with if you're going to stagger the height, I think we're going to need to have some kind of issues regarding setbacks. But the higher you go and the more shadow effect on residential, I think it's gonna kind of lose the density that we're trying to get along the core network, if that makes sense.
Yes. That's why, yeah, for sure. There's other considerations beyond just how tall do we want to build.
If it was for me, I actually like the 70. Because the whole issue of, and I've actually finally figured out the polling thing. So anyway, I would actually like the 70 because we're that's the best way to maximize it. But I really do worry along a lot of those core networks, there's residential behind, and that shadow effect, the higher you get, the more property you're going to lose because of the shadow effect near residential. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Levin is joining us. Does someone else have their hand up? I'm sorry, I can't see everybody.
Yeah, I do, Eunice. It's
great.
So is there an option for sort of fine tuning this a little bit and have maybe, so we don't have such a blunt instrument of 70 feet to the max in all of these? Can we do something that's, got variety depending on where it's at. Maybe the closer into the core, it's higher or something, you know, or the closer it is to residential, it's lower, you know, that kind of thing. Do we have the option to making those different choices rather than just one height for the max?
Probably not in one zone. So we're talking about the new MU3 zone, which, like Eunice said, will mostly be applied to areas that are commercial retail today. So not generally areas near the core. The areas near the core that we're proposing to switch to mixed use, we're proposing one of the more urban mixed use zones that already exist, MU1 or MU2. So through the selection of where those zones are being placed, we're looking at things like, are they next to residential? What kind of development's already there today? What's the width of the street? You know, what makes more sense for residential versus something that may not be as residential, like this new MU3. But then generally the zone would have a height, just a height, like every zone just generally has one height, where it does have flexibility is the setbacks, because the setbacks are generally dependent upon what zone you're next to. So they might have no setback if you're next to another, you know, commercial zone or something, and then have a really, you know, small or large setbacks for residential or industrial or that kind of thing. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Stapleton?
Hi, thanks. Could you maybe give me a little background as to why you landed on 55, 65, 70? To me, it looks like, you know, we have like a 4-story, a 5-story, 6-story, but then to jump from 6-story, hypothetically, all the way to no max kind of seems like a very big jump, I guess. Could you explain that just a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, we were just looking at, first of all, 50 is kind of where we would be if we didn't increase it. And then we have other zones that are at these heights. I'm not sure we have anything beyond 70 unless we just kind of go to no max. We could certainly look at a different height if it's 75, 80. I'm not sure we're going to get that tall of buildings along the core network, but potentially, I mean, there would have to be perhaps some incentives. But yeah, don't feel totally constrained by this. This is kind of what we have existing today as kind of options and zones that we know are on the ground today.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I should have had an other. It looks like majority are thinking maybe 70. Again, not binding. So we can always bring something back, maybe pair it with a setback, further refine it.
Eunice, Commissioner Sweikart has her hand raised.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
It's okay. So I was looking at our 6 zoning options, and 4 of the 6 mention the core network, and this is the one that says along the core network. 3 others say near the core network, and there was, in the public comment that we received from 350 Salem, I think what was kind of a good point to bring up was that, like, how far from the network are we applying each of these particular items? Because, you know, I see that I'm also looking at the interactive zoning map that has been shared. And that, you know, these parcels that we're talking about that would have this particular designation of MU3 are really just the parcel that is immediately adjacent, or perhaps one off, you know, in a couple of instances. So then the thought that I have is, you know, in what instances does that abutment, you know, how, I don't know if I don't know if you can answer this for me, but how many times are we seeing a step down from this potential MU3 down to, say, like a RM2 versus an RM1 versus an RS versus, you know, like in terms of the step down of intensity of use from that parcel that's immediately adjacent to the core network? Because, you know, I hear what everyone's saying, and I also saw the public comment that we've gotten, written public comment, and I think that this particular number 1 of these 6 zoning options is one that folks have really latched on to think about the step down of uses and kind of the immediacy of something that could be potentially at a 70-foot height to something that's potentially only at like a 1-story building, and like the likelihood that we would see those two things immediately adjacent to one another is, I guess, like what comes to mind for me, rather than, you know, possibly placing the MU3 next to something that already has you know, perhaps a more dense height like an RM2 could potentially have. Like that's the kind of thing I was just trying to think of, like how much do we have like a step down of zoning, you know, uses along the core network already, and how much do we have just residential like RS right up to that parcel that we're talking about kicking up to 70 feet. So yeah, that was just the general thought I had.
Yeah, no, it's a great comment. I would say in some locations we have multifamily behind what would be the proposed mixed use 3, but in some locations it is just single family. And so we can bring back a map if that will help at the next meeting, or I can, I guess, pull up a map now.
We could probably bring some sort of analysis, like
back
a percentage that's next to RS versus
Yeah.
RM2 versus existing commercial or something.
Yeah.
And then also remember that we're creating this is a new zone. And so then in the future, people could have asked to apply it elsewhere. So it's not just about where we would be applying it today. For your other question, Commissioner Swikart, about the other things near the core network, we'll talk about what we mean by near when we get to those. For this one, in case it wasn't clear, we just mean the properties that we're showing as MU3 to be rezoned, which are on the core network. So.
Yes.
So Eunice, I have a quick comment.
Great.
So in terms of meeting process, my takeaway from this conversation and the polling is that this group is definitely interested in increasing the height. Doesn't look like we're overall, we want some limit, although, you know, at least everybody is looking at least 15 feet additional height. So it seems like my takeaway is like, yeah, we want to pursue this some more. I think we would like you to go do some more work maybe and come back with some more, and maybe drill down one more layer, a little bit more detail, so we could look at it a little bit more refined level rather than such a blunt look. And so that's my takeaway from the conversation and the polling so far. And I don't know how much time we want to spend on each topic, but
okay.
In my mind, that's where we're at. I don't know.
Okay.
This is why you're the chair, Councilor
Move
Hoy.
us along. Thank you. Yeah, we've gotten through it. So this is just, we wanted to give it.
Maybe we should skip this one.
Okay,
I feel like that was a good
Moving
summary.
on. Great.
We got a yes.
Okay. I'll try to speed through. Again, if we don't get done, that's okay. So the second one is eliminating parking requirements for all uses near the core network. And so when we say near here, we're really thinking kind of that quarter mile, what we have done already for multifamily housing. I see faces. Okay, but that could change. That is just what we generally have been talking about. And again, this would just remove the requirement. So it's not saying you couldn't build housing, but we wouldn't require you to build the housing. And it could be for, and we'll kind of talk through this, all uses, specific uses, etc. And again, this is just making more space and letting the market kind of drive that. We could also use it as a tool like we've done with multifamily to incentivize development. So we have seen more units developed in multifamily projects since we removed the parking requirement for multifamily near the core network, where they've built little to no parking and gotten more units. Or we could say, you know, if we wanted to incentivize mixed use development, we could say you don't have to do it as long as you have a mix of housing and commercial. So this could be a tool as well. So these are, go ahead.
Before we move on to that, I think that my biggest concern with this one, and I certainly voted for the previous proposal to eliminate it within a quarter mile, but what we didn't really think about is that if you look in the core where a lot of these things start coming together, a quarter of a mile will pretty much cover a big swath of land there, which I don't think was really our intention or our conscious intention. So maybe there's a way to look at that, something other than just a blunt quarter mile. Because like when we get down here, like I said, towards the city center, a quarter of a mile is going to cover all those neighborhoods, and I'm not sure that's wise. I certainly in some of the outlying areas maybe it is, but so I would hope we could have some conversation about that quarter mile.
Yes. Yeah, and we did receive a comment about that, like one whole neighborhood essentially included. So this is just kind of where we are currently within a quarter mile of the core network. So the only place that we've actually reduced the parking is multifamily, which again is new. Generally downtown, we don't require parking. And then when we created, again, the mixed use zones, we wanted to incentivize people to build retail. And so we actually reduced the parking requirement just for retail in those zones. So that's kind of an example of what we could do if we wanted to be very specific. So not all uses, not everywhere. Maybe it's a quarter mile, maybe it's less, but it may be just for specific uses that the community really wants to see developed. So other communities are doing this. Portland is probably the biggest example where they don't require parking if you're super close. So they say 500 feet from frequent transit, no, you don't need to do any parking. Their transit system. And outside of Oregon, some places are going to the kind of real extreme of just like no parking requirements. Again, requirement, not allowance, but requirements for parking anywhere, citywide for all uses. I'm not sure if we're there yet as a city, if that's where we're headed, but just wanted to give them as examples.
Commissioner Levin has his hand raised.
Great. Go ahead.
Commissioner Levin, you're muted.
Oh.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Took me I show no, and we could be having connection issues with my signal. Can you?
We lost you again.
You cut in and out a little bit, Ian.
I think we lost him. I saw his name drop off the participants, so he might have been lost to us.
Okay, maybe he'll come back. Oh.
Now.
Not really.
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Yep, go ahead.
I don't know. Is the audio working now?
Not really.
I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but perhaps chat would be an alternative.
I think that's a great suggestion. Commissioner Levin, if maybe you could chat to the staff, then we can reiterate what your question or thought is. But maybe Eunice, you can go ahead.
Okay. I can't see the chat, so please tell me if there's something in the chat. Thank you. So other things to consider, there is rulemaking that's going on related to climate with the climate friendly and equitable communities work that's happening right now at the state level. And one of the things that they may come down as a requirement to us is to actually limit off-street parking mandates. We don't know what that's going to look like right now. Maybe by fall, end of year, we'll have a better sense of what the requirement from the state will be. So this may already just be happening to us at some point. I think the plan is for the state to take the rules or the proposed rules through the adoption process through LCDC in March next year. So we will coordinate. Julie Warnicki's on the advisory committee and Lease is by so we're very plugged into that process and just wanted to let you know that's kind of happening outside of our Salem. Just wanted to also point out, obviously by eliminating all parking, if we were to do that requirements, the market still could provide it. And then again, we have heard concerns about impacts on adjacent businesses and neighborhoods and cars parking all over neighborhoods. Okay. Questions, discussion?
Eunice?
Yeah.
Hi. One of the things in the research that I did, it was, a lot of it is to create density and intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Parking is the big issue, and the promotion of transit. It's getting everybody off the cars. This is like it seems like a no-brainer, but I mean, a lot of, especially the retail, some there in Salem, it's going to be quite hard to do is to get no parking. I mean, I'd like to say no parking, but the issue that it also brings up is parking lot sharing. We've never really kind of done this before. I think there's been only a couple of projects that come across since I've been on the planning commission. But is there any kind of research that you're familiar with that maybe several developments can share parking to meet, like if there is a requirement, if we don't get a particular, mixed use that has no, or a long core network, if it's not no requirement, but there is a requirement, but there has to be off street, can we have something that talks about parking lot sharing?
Yes, we do allow for shared parking today. I'm not sure there's a lot of shared parking actually happening.
No, well, so Eunice doesn't work on current planning. So I will say that I would say that's inaccurate. I think we see a lot of parking lease agreements for the people sign in order to meet their minimum parking requirement. It's not common for new development. It's usually for when there's a change of use. And so not something that would necessarily be in front of the planning commission. But say a business was an office before, and then they come in and switch it to retail, which has a higher parking demand or requirement under our code, I should say. And then, if it's an existing, lot and it doesn't meet that standard, then we say, well, you can get a zoning adjustment, or you can go, lease it within this amount of space. And so we see a lot of parking lease agreements for that. Sometimes it seems like it's kind of a burden because the business has already determined they don't need a larger parking lot. That's why they decided to lease that, space or buy that office. But instead they have to go out and pay a monthly fee to one of their neighbors for at least 5 years, because we require a 5-year agreement before we'll let them occupy that space. And so we do see a lot of those, but I don't know that it's necessarily because the business needs it. It's because we are saying they need that parking a certain number. So
well, doesn't that in itself tell us that we should, reduce the amount of parking?
Yes, a lot of planners' jobs is telling people what their parking requirements are and helping them get an approval to have a smaller number or some other way to occupy a space, again, that they've already determined through their own, business needs and analysis that works for them and their business, what's on the ground. And we say it doesn't meet the code. And so that creates a big barrier to them.
Yeah, because the research I did, whether it was the EPA report, a white paper, American Planning Association, another one, urban planners and stuff, everything is just along those, like their core area where you would put these, mixed use, or, especially, is just basically no requirement. And it's because you're making it hard for them to have a car. And you're trying to promote the health and welfare of people by making them get on their feet or on a bike or ride the bus. So, the no requirement, it seems to be what all smart growth research says the way to go. Okay, thank you.
And of course, as Eunice is saying, that even if we eliminate the requirements, the business or user could decide that their use does need a certain amount of parking and they could provide that, but that's based on their own kind of market needs instead of the city dictating that.
Thank you.
Eunice, I have a comment. I appreciate Lisa's last comment, and I think that's going to be whatever we decide to move forward on this issue needs to be communicated well, so folks are understanding that it's still an option for a developer to provide parking based on consumer need. But with respect to my colleague, Commissioner Pollack, I think that the no parking requirement sort of falls along the same lines as there's no height limit on a building. It's such an extreme. I would rather see the parking reduction in certain areas for certain uses, at least to start with, because I just think there's so many unintended consequences. We've got two, what I would call urban parks near the core, Bush Park that has great parking and the riverfront that has great parking. And I can just see folks, using one of those venues to park, or our neighborhood streets, which we have such a beautiful area, two beautiful areas adjacent to downtown. And I think we need to be mindful of those unintended consequences. So I'm going to be more of the middle of the road one on this vote, as opposed to eliminating the parking requirements across the board. That's my comment.
Is there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Eunice, this is Virginia.
Yeah.
I was just trying to, you had said a quarter mile for Salem, and then kind of switched, what do you call it? Units of measurement when we went to Portland at 500 feet. So then I was like, okay, well, what is 500 feet in miles, right? And so a quarter of a mile is a little over 1,300 feet. And so when I go to Portland, and when I have me and my husband have these conversations about, do we want to become a Portland where parking is just, you want to pull your hair out sometimes. But my question is Portland's problem maybe that they didn't go far enough? So at 500 feet, is that not far enough from a transit line to really encourage people to use said transit line? So if it was a quarter mile, then it would be more of an incentive to, am I making sense? Can somebody nod on the camera if I'm making sense at all? I guess that's my question, right? Because a downtown city block is what, 600 feet? I'm asking somebody. Yeah, Lisa's saying yes. So when I look at that into a neighborhood, and I don't know what a neighborhood block typically is, but in my head, that's kind of the same. 500 feet doesn't even get me one block from transit, to where 1,300 feet would get me a few blocks. Am I understanding this in my head as I'm trying to make it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. That helps. Thank you. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, maybe Portland didn't go far enough, and that's why they have the parking problem, because it's not incentivized enough. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure kind of if it was broader, wider, farther away in Portland, if it would have made a difference. We can always look into it. Councilor Hart?
I think we pick a quarter mile. That's considered easily walkable for most people. Yeah, quarter mile is common for a lot of things in planning. If you're going to pick a distance that, that you're assuming people are willing to walk without it being too burdensome, a quarter mile is generally what we pick.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Virginia, just so you know, but we dealt with this a little bit before you were on council, and the number one area of concern came from your ward. And so just so you're aware, like when we eliminated the parking within the quarter mile of the core, there was the feeling that it was going to have a huge impact on your area, like your Winter Street, especially where it interfaces like with the state, where you have neighborhoods that butt up close to state buildings. Apparently there's, a lot of issues, or there have been issues, and I think there's a perception that there will be more issues. I think it certainly drives us into more managing parking in neighborhoods, which we haven't done a lot of traditionally. And we probably would have to do, where we're having residential zones and we're having actual significant parking patrols and that sort of thing. We would really have to start managing the situation in those kinds of areas should we go this route. And I guess I appreciate Commissioner Griggs's thoughts on it. My thoughts are still I'm all over the board on this one still. I'm not settled on where I think we should go. I definitely would like more information before I am ready to really weigh in. I like the concept of eliminating parking, or at least decreasing it, but I don't know yet. I'm concerned about the unintended consequences.
This is Ian. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Finally far enough off the hill. So a couple of comments I wanted to provide on this topic about parking and reduction in development standards. And this is a really broad impacting subject to development. And if Salem didn't exist at all and we were starting from a clean slate, it'd be very easy to put more rigid structure to it. So is including flexibility in how it's applied, because not everything will be, as we're discussing, a clean vacant lot. It could be an empty lot next to a bunch of houses. It could go one block down the road and be a demo next to apartments. And so the different shapes, the boundaries that we run into, we do have a major river, all those create complications when applying design standards. And so the idea of reducing parking, I am a supporter of, not because I want to see more building footprint, but if you do reduce parking overall in a broad scheme citywide, we would generally increase density by that. So it would allow for, in tenths of percentages, a few more dwelling units. And so we would be able to maximize just a little bit more our current urban growth boundary with the growth that our city is on. But the other reason that I'm a big supporter of reduction in parking requirements is that I think developers in general, which developers, let's use that as a broad term for anyone in the building industry or real estate industry in the creation of new space or remodeled space, is that the response and the product to market is always better if there are incentives. And so if we start looking at the development standards from an incentive standpoint instead of almost like a rule of law standpoint, in our mindset, something that, if I was to give an example related to parking, a opportunity for a reduction in permit fees or some other type of incentive if a developer put more parking than the minimum required, or as an alternative, if a home builder put in more trees than the minimum required, maybe there's an offset that the city can offer. And the first of mind example is something like a permit fee, and you get a couple $100 off if you plant a second tree, and $100 for every tree after that, or a similar thing with parking, so that there's an incentive base. I think you'll find that builders and developers will respond to that in kind. And the idea of letting the no parking requirement and let the market fully dictate, unfortunately, that's what Portland is, and you have to wait for generations for bad ideas to then get to be affordable again, to somehow tear into and redevelop and maybe add the parking that they should have had in that area. So to look at this from the lens that going to no parking would create additional conflict, and I agree with President Griggs that the open door policy that would create with development would create havoc with the existing neighborhoods and just create more problems for the city to deal with. So reduction in parking would be several steps in the right direction, and then incentives and using that incentive program across the board throughout development requirements would be, just life-changing. I think we'd see so much more investment from developers if we took that approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Levin. And I think we are kind of moving in that direction. When we did the multifamily changes, maybe it was during State Street, I can't remember which one. We did say if you could reduce your parking if you provided maybe car share or more bike parking or kind of the offset to that. And so we could certainly look at, pushing those even further. If eliminating parking, everyone kind of said no to this and they really wanted to go the incentive route. I think Councilor Phillips had a hand raised. Oh, yep.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the discussion of everybody who's spoken so far. And Councilor Stapleton, I did understand what you were getting at, and I thank you for raising that topic and discussing it. I mean, this feels very like all of the decisions we're making are going to be kind of, for lack of a better expression, passive. Like we're going to hope that the market, uses these to do things that then lowers, greenhouse gases within the time frame that's been established by the city council, a 50% reduction by 2035 and then 100% by 2050. And I just don't feel like I have the data to know yet if we're going to get that with any of these decisions. I mean, I would vote very differently on this topic if I knew of the real world impact it would have. I mean, if this was the number one thing that would lower our greenhouse gases, I would vote for no parking. But if it's like we're not really sure and it's going to be like a mild benefit, then I might want to take like a smaller step. So just, noting that, I guess my question about how I would respond to this is, what is our question today? As our question today, our primary goal is to achieve through these zoning changes, reducing the greenhouse gases by 50 and then 100% at the timeline we set, or is our input, in the positions we hold, trying to give staff an understanding of like what the community will let us do? Or is it both? And we've just got to do the best we can.
I'm leaning towards both. I don't think, though, through these 6 options, we are going to get to carbon neutrality. I mean, this is just very like one way or 6 little ways. There needs to be a lot more, like you were saying. I mean, there needs to be improvements in transportation, maybe incentives, financial incentives. I mean, our environment. I mean, there's a lot of steps. And I think the Climate Action Plan is looking holistically at all of that. We're just trying to see what can we do in the zoning code to help.
And thank you, Eunice. That does help. I mean, the other thing is knowing that the state's going to come along and probably create their own rules. I would certainly want to have our rules be at a minimum in line with what's going to happen anyway.
Yes.
So do we have any sense if they're going to do like what Portland did with 500 feet, or we just won't know until the fall?
I think those discussions that committee, the advisory committee, is kind of taking a break during the legislative session. I think they're going to start meeting again in July. So we'll know more in the summer. And hopefully we'll know more by the time we actually bring something through the adoption process.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm okay with potentially 500 feet. I mean, I think it's a little more targeted. Again, I would vote for no parking if I knew it would make a really big impact on reducing greenhouse gases. More data is always good. I would like us to be more data driven in general. I like the idea of like looking at incentives. I don't know if that's, if we can do that through zoning changes, but if we can, I'm open for that discussion. And then finally, the rate of change is going to continue to increase. I mean, we just lived through the last 13 months where we've seen things that are once in a century events stacked on top of each other. And I think that like the work life is totally changed. I mean, how many people are now, doing things remotely? Like all of us right now are essentially doing this remotely. So how much of a real world impact will these parking changes have given our new normal that's kind of constantly changing? But it seems to support like this trend of people will be working more and more from home.
I think that's a good point. We have seen a lot of changes. And I think we have seen the results of our multifamily parking elimination in some, again, kind of core areas. But that's a good point. I wonder, so we're at the halfway mark. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just say one comment? Sorry, Eunice.
Yeah, I can't see you.
Councilor Phillips, I think it's really important. 2 things. One, like Eunice said, zoning is only going to get us a little tiny bit of the way there for climate, but we do know from best practices and other examples from around the country that one way zoning can impact climate change, GHG emissions, is to ensure that we have compact mixed use development near services and transit. So that's why we are concentrating mixed use along our core. But what we need, more just direction on, I guess, is, does Salem want to be permissive in the zoning, i.e. we'll change these areas to mixed use and hope people build that because now they're allowed to? Or do we want to push more development to actually have to do that? right? So is it about being permissive and hoping that that's what the result we get in 20 years? Or is it about really pushing for that result? And so one of the things to think about for eliminating parking, which is going to relate to one of the other items we're going to talk about today, as far as getting housing in some of these areas, could we use the parking to encourage mixed use development on a site that maybe instead would just be a commercial use, right? So maybe somebody says, well, I could do commercial here, but the city says I don't have to do any parking for my commercial if I add housing with it. That could be a way we could use the zoning and the parking in particular to incentivize the housing there, instead of maybe a blanket no parking everywhere. Although we do know with no parking, then people can, if they choose to, use their site more efficiently or more fully, I guess, in those areas.
I appreciate that. And just to follow up, that framework makes more sense to me. Push.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Hoy?
Thank you. Just following up on what Lisa just said, I would like to see maybe staff do some more development of the concept of the incentives, so we can understand like what are the what's the range of possibilities, like what are the kinds of things that we could do to incentivize. I mean, I was intrigued by what Ian had to say about the trees and the the parking spaces, and I'm intrigued with that, and I would like to hear more about like what's the scope here, what's the range of possibilities when it comes to incentivizing. So that's one thing that would help me come to a better decision, I think.
And so just to clarify, incentives in terms of using parking as an incentive, or parking okay.
Using parking as an incentive.
As incentive, okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Councillor Stapleton?
Thanks. I don't know if I was the first one up.
I'm sorry, I can't.
It's okay. I just, do you want to go ahead, Josh?
No, you go ahead first.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my head is kind of spinning with all of these conversations, and I'm really thankful for all of you, especially the ones I know the best as far as personally here. My fellow counselors are bringing up all kinds of things for me to think about. Question that I had kind of stems off of both of them. And Councilor Hoy, you were talking about my ward being kind of ground zero for this. And I think that we are a high impact, high use ward. And if you live here, you know that. But it's also change is always hard, right? And so as we lead in this way, how do we bring along the wards that we're a part of and the changes that are going to happen? And my question is, I live in a little area where you have to pay to park on street. What's that called, Eunice? Do you remember?
Residential parking district.
Residential parking district. Thank you. And I know that they're now making another one over in the Grant neighborhood because of this high premium on street parking in these neighborhoods, because we are so close to downtown and state buildings and people using them during the day. And my question is, Eunice, is there a way to kind of gauge how much room there is in some of these spaces? Okay, I'm getting kind of crazy here. I'm going to try and articulate what's in my head. So I'm going to maybe speak in an example form. So say you have the Grant neighborhood that has, 50% of their available street parking is used up by residential parking district tags, right? So you know that you have a certain amount of space left on street, data driven, again, like Councilor Phillips was talking about. Then when somebody comes to build there, could that then, if they're going to build an apartment complex where they might use that on-street parking, could their parking requirements be connected to the data-driven source of the availability within the area? Did that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is something that other cities do, where they allow you, for example, to meet some of your parking requirements with on-street parking. I don't think we've done that here at the city. Lisa,
but I think maybe you're saying the opposite. Like if there's not enough on-street parking, then they would be required to provide it. Is that
right?
Maybe
right.
Yeah, and both ways. I think you can use it both ways.
What I would say is we did do a parking study in your neighborhood when I was baby long range planner. I worked on it because there was the perception that there was a terrible parking problem on Broadway with the new developments that had gone in. And so we hired a parking consultant. We did all these surveys of on-street parking, day and night, weekend, and most of the residential streets were almost completely vacant all day long during the day because nobody could park there unless they were a resident, and the residents went to work elsewhere. And then there was about 3 blocks around the commercial businesses on Broadway that were really packed. And then the rest of the blocks that there was ample parking if you just walked like one more block. Everybody wanted to park at Christo's, it's great pizza, and they wanted to park there. But if you walked one block, either direction, you could park just fine. And so the parking it didn't match up at all with people's perceptions. There were recommendations out of that parking study about, some blocks had kind of weird times, some would be 30 minutes and some would be 2 hours. And so cleaning some of that up, but there was considerations at the time for selling permits for business users to park on the residential streets during the day and to keep that money and use it in those neighborhoods for improvements, right? So the money stays in that neighborhood and then you could only park there during the day, and then at night the parking would be available for the residents. The parking wasn't, again, at the high level to where creating those programs would make sense, but that's something the city could look at again. There's all kinds of interesting and unique ways that the city could manage the parking. I agree with what Councilor Hoy said. We do very little of on-street parking management, and I think we can do a lot more. There's a lot of cities that do a lot more that could better utilize that resource that, as taxpayers, everybody pays for those streets to be there. And there's a lot of available street parking. And as someone who grew up in Grant with only street parking, I'm excellent parallel parker, but I'm also very aware that, some people think the spot right in front of their house is their spot, including my parents. They always told me if I didn't park their car right back in front of the house, I couldn't use it again when I was a teenager. So I understand that as well. But I think the city could do more of that, and especially if we're going to continue to reduce parking in certain areas, that could be a way that we could offset it by looking at, neighborhood specific parking situations. And that was a recommendation out of the State Street Project as well, as to do a parking management plan for those neighborhoods who were, like Grant, really impacted by the state workers and their parking.
Thank you so much, guys. It was really helpful.
Okay. Me now? Eunice, can I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So there's 3 points I want to make, and I'm going to refer to this American, I think it's an American Planning Institute, that 294-page thing that I sent out to everybody, because there was some really great points. And one of the things I want to point out here is that it says here, not all mixed uses will provide that constitute smart growth in all zoning. So when we draft the code, we have to carefully consider possible combinations to achieve our goal. And here, through our Salem, we worked this community worked really hard. The whole idea of creating that mixed use along core network is to get people out of their cars. And so, I agree. So if we're going to meet the goals of reducing greenhouse gases, it's to reduce the amount of parking to get people out of the car in the mixed use area. Now, we're not talking all over. We're talking, I know what's in front of us, eliminating three different.
Oh yeah, sorry.
But the most important area here that we're talking about, because in the definition, smart growth principles call for some shopping, commercial activities to be walking distance between residential neighborhoods, and to also employment centers to be as close to residential areas. So the whole idea is that it's not only for the people that live above the retail and commercial along the core network, but it's also for the people that live within the few blocks afterwards when walking in that quarter-mile district to also come and frequent those areas and not use their cars. So I agree with Councilor Phillips when it's when they're talking about there is a definite change. You know, there are people that are going to be working out of their homes. I mean, this COVID pandemic has really changed the way we view a lot of things. And there are going to be people, some people have gone out to the way urban area, bought a farm in Montana, decided to work their house, do work from there. But others are going to say, well, how about I live and work where I can shop, pick up my groceries, and I have said this before, and I've said it in another planning commission. Whenever I look at England and I see their kind of communities there, and there's one favorite show that I like called Agatha Raisin, and I said, this is what I like. Anywhere you can walk with high heels and do all your shopping and go to your pub and do everything. That's the way to deal with climate control. Control is like walking distance. So I think that no requirement but leave it flexible is, we do have to push it. And then the third thing is going to Councillor Hoyt. If we're going to do this, we have to also properly manage the parking. I come originally from Huntington Beach. We deal with summertime traffic all the time. There is, residential people have their permits. The non-residential have their time limits. And there's just, it's maybe one side of the street, there's no parking. The ones that do have parking. I mean, I think Salem's going to have to come up with a better management plan for the areas along the core network. So there's three things. One, you have done a great job of saying not all mixed use is going to be benefits, but the mixed use along the core network is the whole idea of being near transit is to get you out of cars. The next thing, as far as density and intensity, by creating more parking, you're sort of taking away from our goal, greenhouse gas reduction. And then the last thing, if you're going to do this, you also have to be considerate of the neighborhood and manage the parking better. Those are the 3 points I just want to make. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know from the Climate Action Plan Task Force, there are discussions about better parking management, flexible parking management, or dynamic parking pricing, charging for parking. And so that is something that is being looked at. And so we could certainly kind of obviously coordinate with them and say, if we're going to go this route, we need to start looking at that other side as well, parking management. So we are going to, someone's in the chat, 1 second. So we have 20 minutes until we're going to public comment. So it's okay. It's okay that we didn't make it through everything. I might try to just see if you have general thoughts on this. I don't know if you want to think about specific uses yet, or if you want us to just come back. What I'm hearing is that there's some who are interested in limiting parking as long as we are managing the parking, or maybe we look at the incentive route. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm interested in looking at considering all the options. So I would like you to come back maybe with a menu of like, okay, what do incentives look like? What are all the different options? And I just don't feel like I'm settled yet on a particular path. So I'd like to hear more before we get there.
Okay. I will move on then. So we don't need to vote. So the next option is around our ideas about density. And so this is the idea of, should we be actually requiring a certain amount of housing to be built, either in the mixed use or the multifamily zones, either along the core network or citywide? So the idea, so we do have minimum densities today. Maybe I should show that so I can kind of talk through it. Where we say in a multifamily zone and in our mixed use zone, if you have a certain amount of land the base is just like an acre. So you have an acre of land and you're doing housing, you need to at least create a certain amount of housing units. So in our multifamily 1 zone, you have to at least do 8 units. If you had an acre, you couldn't just build 1 house. We would say you don't meet our minimum density requirements. If we were to increase our minimum density requirements, we would just push and say, you actually have to create more housing than our current standards. When we did the mixed use zones, the mixed use 1 and mixed use 2 zones, we wanted to incentivize mixed use generally. So if you did retail, for example, and you added housing, there was no requirement for the amount of housing you had to add. But we said, if you're just doing multifamily housing, we would like you to use this land to a kind of a higher potential. And we set it at 12 dwelling units per acre, which is in line with our multifamily 2 zone. Most of our multifamily land in Salem is multifamily 2. Most people are trying to build at that higher density. And so this is some pictures to show kind of what do those densities look like on the ground. The mixed use 1 zone this is an example of townhomes, I think in South Salem. So again, it's lower density, but most of our development again is this multifamily 2 zone. This is in West Salem, where again, it's a higher density development. So we did look at other cities and what do they do with their densities. A lot of cities do have higher densities in their multifamily zones than we do, just as an example. And we did take a look at what are we building at today. So we looked at some of the multifamily projects that have recently improved last year, including with the parking reductions or the elimination of parking requirements along the core network. And we are getting a higher density than our minimums. So roughly 21 units per acre is what we're getting in more recent developments. In talking with the state, they are looking at setting a potential density requirement of about 15 units per acre. This is generally also kind of a level of density that would be really supportive of transit. And so we will, again, keep an eye on what's happening with the state, but that's generally the target, 15 units per acre. The other considerations, of course, are the market. If we set it too high, say we're like, everyone needs to do 25 units per acre, then at some point it's like, we just don't have the market to support that here and we won't get development. So I think we obviously have to be careful in setting that at the right place if we were to increase it. But we do have a relief valve. So in planning, if you can't meet a minimum density, you can apply for an adjustment, which is an approval process at the staff level, where you say, I can't meet it, and this is why, this is how I justify it. So there is kind of that relief valve. That was a lot really quickly. So I'm gonna just go back and kind of go back here. Are there questions, I guess, about what the minimum densities are as a baseline, and then we can talk about locations and things like that.
Commissioner Weikart has her hand up.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I think, I guess when I think about this particular option, I think about it in the context of the other requirements that are part of the design standards that we have. And so needing to say, okay, if we are going to set a higher minimum, say, the 15 unit per acre that the state's requiring, or 20, something like that, does that, what else do we need to do to ensure that we are not, hamstringing developers when it comes to, does that mean we decrease the minimum square footage of open space, or amenities in a multifamily development? Do we change the landscaping requirements? Do we change the, there's the setbacks? What are we then also kind of tweaking with respect to the design standards to ensure that there's still a flexibility that the developer can have to create a space that is usable, that is aesthetically pleasing, that makes sense for livability of the folks who do live there. And so that's what comes to mind to me, is just thinking about it from a holistically about what other changes do we make to the design standards if we do make that increase, which I think I'm for, but I think needs to be in context.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think we've kind of started along those routes, right? With the parking, I think one of the biggest space taker-uppers is parking. So if we were to increase the density as a minimum requirement, the fact that we don't require parking in certain areas will help. Also, I think we tried to make kind of strides towards that end in terms of the flexibility and the design standards that we recently changed. But we would certainly have, if there was an interest in kind of moving down this route, talking to folks about it, are there more things we would need to do? And what's the right level? Councilor Gonzalez, you have a hand raised and I can see it.
Eunice, I just wanted to, the slide after this where you showed that currently in Salem it's about 21, right? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share that that's really helpful because some of us, and even myself, to know what the minimum maximum and what that means in the real world, having that gives us an idea of what's happening currently. So I just want to say that's helpful. So with other things we do, that'd be nice to be able to have some real world data locally. And then also in this case, find out if there is incentives as we start making these adjustments, just like the pressure relief valve thing you mentioned. Those are the kind of things that I think are real helpful when you're putting these things on the plate for us committee members.
Great. And I think some of these things are related, right? If we were to set a really low maximum height, it would be really hard to achieve a certain density. So I do think they are related. I think that was a good point that you brought up, Commissioner Schweikart. Does someone else have their hand raised?
Yes, Chair Griggs.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Commissioner Schweikart. I know that just generally, I'm in favor of increasing that density, even the 15 or even a little bit higher. But I'm curious. I know that one of the conversations points that we had that seemed to has been dropped is allowing renters to opt out of parking. So that would, lessen the number, lower the number of required parking spaces if the developer knew that going, So why did that get dropped? Because that seems such a logical option for a renter to say, hey, I'm not going to use a car. So can you just not, lower my rent, whatever it is. And then they don't have to build so many parking spaces. What happened with that?
That's a good point. That came up, I think, during the multifamily housing design standards discussion of unbundling the parking and saying, letting people, opt in. Yeah. I'm not sure the discussion really went towards eliminating parking. So that's kind of how we went there.
It just seems like that would be part of part of the solution.
Okay. And I think that actually is part of the climate action. That's one of the strategies that is under consideration is unbundling parking.
Okay. It didn't get dropped then?
Not from that, no.
Okay.
So just so everybody's aware, unbundling means that you would charge rent for the unit and then you would charge rent for the parking space. So the cost of the parking space is not included in your rent, and you would decide if you want to rent a parking space. And if so, you would have a cost for that that's separate from your house or your unit. So that way, if you, for example, don't drive a car, you don't need to pay for parking. It's not just included in your rent, this cost that you have to cover even if you don't need it.
Eunice, can you go back one slide? I liked seeing what comparatively the other cities. I'd like to study that for a minute. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the recent, looking at recent projects last year that were approved, I think the lowest density was close to 15. So while the average was a little higher, I don't think there was anyone who dropped below 15 units per acre, just as a point of data. Commissioner Pollack, you have your hand raised?
Yes. So I'm looking at Harvard Kennedy School Rappaport Institute green zoning through incentive zoning. And so basically, when I think of density, and what they reference here is density is not necessarily the issue of getting people out of their cars and onto the bus. To me, density is more about an energy consumption. And so like it quotes here, like the single family detached homes are like the least energy efficient form of housing, and then large apartment buildings, 5 or more, are more efficient on average, with single family attached homes and small apartment in between. And so they do talk about the new smart growth and what they call density bonus policy. And just to throw it out there, they, in their toolbox, what they call a bonus toolbox, is, well, they show the issues and mandates, but one is expedited permitting. So if you decide to go to the maximum, or fee waiver and reduction, tax break credits, some grants, some consultation, and some low interest loans. So these are all things in the toolbox that could be, like Commissioner Levine said, that are incentivizing to try to, once you figure out a range and you try to get them to do the max, that in this toolbox, these are things that are, I think, especially like permitting, expediting permitting. I mean, when you have a piece of land and you're paying a mortgage on it and you're a developer, man, that every day and every day that you go by and you're not going forward with stuff is more money you're paying than you're not getting any kind of profit. So I just wanted to say that, to me, density means energy efficiency, not getting out of the car. And when it comes energy efficiency, here's the toolbox that we might be able to, so to get when you do consider what ranges you do, to try to get the developers to go higher rather than just do the minimum. So that's just food for thought and things to consider when you come back maybe and give us options.
Great.
Commissioner Schweikart has her hand raised.
Great.
I was just wondering if, I know that folks have been making comments about this this option kind of broadly, but there is the kind of either or that's set up here, which is like near the core network or throughout Salem. So I just kind of wanted to bring in that component of, what, that those are two different options. I think that personally, I would lean towards the throughout Salem, but I think that kind of what's been talked about here is that if it's near the core network and we're combining this zoning option with some of the other zoning proposals that are on the table, then that's maybe a little bit, it makes it easier to meet that minimum if you're not having the parking requirement and so forth. And so it would require a little bit more to do it if you're outside of the core network. More when I say that, I mean like thinking about what kind of other tweaks we would need to be making to the design standards. And the other thing I just had a quick question about was with respect to incentives, what is currently in existence with respect to allowing like a density bonus if the developer is providing units that are below market rent? I don't know if that's something that Eunice or Lisa could speak to.
Sure. So we don't have a density bonus per se, but we do have a parking reduction, which allows you to then use more of your property for housing if it's affordable. And I think the state passed a law that if it's affordable, there is a shorter timeline for us to approve it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those kinds of, a combination of, multiple incentives of that nature would be really, great. So thinking about streamlining, permitting approvals, but also providing, additional density allowances, for, if there are below market rate units included.
So we're about to run out of time. Is there someone else with their hand raised? No? Okay. So I'm not sure if it sounds like there's a lot of discussion. I'm not sure people are really ready to weigh in on the area. Is there at least a leaning in terms of, should we be just looking at the core network or should we be looking broadly across the city? Oh, maybe I'll at least.
I'm in favor of broadly across the city.
And this is a map. So the orange is multifamily all over, proposed and existing, and all the purpley colors are the mixed use zones. Go ahead.
So Eunice, I think one point in front of Planning Commission, we see case after case where a developer comes with a very unique parcel that he or she's going to develop into multifamily housing, there's not a lot of available land left to do that. So I think if you limit it and say it's just going to be the core area of Salem, I think you're limiting your choices or your opportunities to provide for that RM2.
Maybe we'll do the poll on this one,
Oh,
Eunice, since we have a
okay.
few minutes and we trained them up on using the poll, right?
Okay, yeah.
I guess
Oh
I
my
have
goodness.
one
Go
last
ahead.
question. I mean, what
Great.
I'm hearing is there are multiple benefits to a more broad distribution of this in terms of like, energy efficiency. Is that what city staff is also seeing in the, relatively small impact that any zoning can have on that question?
I mean, I would say that this also would move us closer to our housing goals generally in terms of needing to accommodate more housing.
It has
So
multiple benefits, but does it theoretically, having a broader throughout Salem, would that theoretically also contribute to decreasing greenhouse gases?
I would say yes. I think, I don't remember who brought that up, that it's more energy efficient than a single family home, right? The denser that you're sharing the space.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from the perspective of a real estate developer, yes. If you're building envelope is including more units, you're able to create efficiencies in how much you're able to control your energy, intake and emission.
I will say that increasing the density for just all of the RM2 zones, for example, might result, like if this decision is made and then, in our Salem, we're going to bring a couple 100 acres of land that we're proposing to be rezoned to multifamily, might make it a more difficult prospect to rezone, or at least more opposition, because not only are we saying it's going to be multifamily, but now we're also saying that land's going to accommodate more houses, and potentially less parking. I just say that because our zoning map has launched this week, and the majority of the comments have been in opposition to proposed property for multifamily.
Yes.
A lot of comments. So that is culminating at the end of this project. There will be a map, a citywide map that we're asking you to rezone a lot of property. So keep that in mind. What Commissioner Scheichert was saying about the increasing the density for the multifamily land along the core, I think works really well with some of the other changes, like the no parking. I think those two things go together, and we've already made that decision for the no parking there. So that might make sense just as a no-brainer to raise the density there. From my perspective, I don't have a problem with raising the density across the city, but I definitely think it makes a lot of sense to do it for the RM2 land that's near the core network.
And it could be a phase thing where we start at the core, things are going okay, there's not too many barriers, developers are able to hit that, and then we expand it as well. So I want to give time for the public unless there's last kind of comments and questions. We made it through 3, not bad, 3 out of 6. And we'll bring back more detail on the 3 and then bring that the other 3 kind of at a high level again to start the conversation at our next meeting. But I do want to let the public talk now. And Zach, are you gonna?
Yep.
Yes, great,
Okay.
thanks.
So we do have 4 members of the public. I believe all of them are here. So I'll call your name, and after I call your name, you'll need to state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes for public comment. So first on our list, we have Phil Carver. So Phil, if you would turn on your camera and microphone, state your name and address for the record, or business address, and you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, members. I appreciate all the great thought and energy that went into the previous discussion. I found it very informative. I'm relatively uninformed about zoning. I know a lot about energy and climate change. I'm representing 350 Salem, which has many hundreds on our email list, and usually a couple dozen or a dozen people attend our twice a month meetings. And I'm representing them as well. Written comments are already there, and many of them are questions, some of which have actually been answered. But I want to get to a higher level of concept about density that I think has been floating around the edges of this, but it hasn't really been addressed. And that is, I think, on the periphery We want to see less houses, period. I mean, if I had my way, it would all be zone park. There would be, many of my members just don't want any more housing out in the periphery. Now, this would be a negative for me personally. I have 5 acres outside the urban growth boundary. Inside the urban growth boundary, but outside the city limits. So my address is 1007 Newport Drive, Southeast. But one way to do that is to not put any multifamily outside the core network, or put only very limited where it's outside the core transit network, but it's near jobs or shopping, like between Lancaster and Cordon Road down near Maclay, where you have the Amazon distribution center there on Cordon Road. And there are some multifamily going in there on Maclay, but there's no walkability or transit from Maclay to the Amazon center, which is maybe a quarter mile. And so there's connectivity issues, so that some multifamily on the periphery is fine in those areas that are within a quarter or half mile of shopping and jobs. But in the West Salem, having multifamily or multi-use up in the periphery there, I would oppose that. I think that's a nutty place to put a density, a concentration of homes and businesses where you're not even near the transit network. Or if you're on the transit network, it's a peripheral transit network. So I think you have to really think about where you want density, and you want it near the core transit network, certainly, and maybe some other areas, maybe south of Kubler on Commercial. That's a really big growing area, and Kubler Commercial, which I live near, is got like 4 grocery stores within 1/8 of a mile of Kubler Commercial. And then there's Safeway, which is just about maybe a mile south of that. And there's a lot of restaurants and all kinds of businesses, especially if you go down to Safeway, there's a food cart area. So I think what happens in urban development in big areas like LA, you get these multimodal, multi-zone, you get density out in what was the periphery of LA, out in Pasadena, Burbank. And the same can happen in Salem. You can get these concentrations of businesses that are not in the downtown, but still in the core transit network or near the core transit network. So, and the other option is like to make a minimum lot size of 1 or 5 acres in the periphery. I mean, don't let these developments occur with, 1/4 acre or 1/9 acre or 12th acre residential lots. And maybe a minimum lot size, a maximum lot size near the core. That is, you have to have a single family. If you have a vacant lot that's 1 acre, you have to put 9 or 12 or 15 dwellings on that, or you can't develop it. So that's the overarching concept: is density is good when it's near things, and density is bad when it's on the periphery. And I don't think the current zoning map, and I don't think this discussion has really focused on that concept of density as a way to decrease carbon emissions and decrease driving, which is what the climate people really.
We've reached 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment, and appreciate all your hard work.
Next on our list, we have Mike Erdman. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So if you would please state your name and address or business address for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike Erdman at the Home Builders Association, 2075 Madrona Avenue Southeast. And I just wanted to comment on a couple of items that really you haven't gotten to yet. One is the kind of the potential requirement for neighborhood hubs and large new subdivisions. The other potentially requiring middle housing in the same. And I just wanted to kind of point out that I think we've got some concerns. I think both there are very good ideas, but on the neighborhood hubs, we've got many large subdivisions that don't have collector or minor arterial streets, maybe only local streets. Our concern is you're just not going to see commercial interest in going in on local streets internal to a subdivision. There's just not going to be enough of a market there for somebody to locate. They want to be on the collectors of the minor arterials. So I guess we'd encourage the city to perhaps look and perhaps be proactive in trying to get out there and get ahead of this, and rezoning or designating some of these lands along the minor arterials or collectors for that type of use. Concern is if you designate that in a subdivision, potentially it's got the risk of really making properties around that a lot less desirable. Folks that are fearful that commercial's going in their subdivision when it's not going to take place at all. On the middle housing, I think we're excited. I think we're going to see a lot of developer interest in middle housing. I'm hearing that already. But middle housing, of course, as you know, is really it's duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes and the like. But what middle housing doesn't include is folks that are doing really small single family on small lots. The example I'll give is what Stafford Homes is doing out in Pringle Creek right now, where they're seeing tremendous demand for smaller, 500 to 900 square foot homes on really small lots. But of course, that's not defined as middle housing. And so we'd encourage the city, maybe instead of requiring middle housing, to look at it a little differently. And perhaps in those large new subdivisions, you could go with a minimum density requirement there instead of a middle housing requirement. And so perhaps then you could also allow the developer to do a certain number of those lots that could be smaller than the otherwise minimum lot requirement. And so that way you could get a little more flexibility. Folks could still do middle housing, duplexes and triplexes, but they could also do a small single family product that we're seeing demand for. And so again, just that flexibility is really important. The other thing I think it's important on middle housing, and this applies across the board, not just large subdivisions, we'd love to see the city approach the land division process concurrently with subdivision platting. And so Senate Bill 458, which is most likely to pass in the legislative session, will allow land divisions for middle housing. The trouble though is you have to have the lot created first before you can come back in and further divide it. And of course, if you want to see middle housing in a new subdivision, forcing the developer to plat that subdivision, but then come back in and do a whole separate land use process afterwards to further divide it is disjointed and more expensive. So perhaps we could have a concurrent process. So when somebody is developing a subdivision and they want to do middle housing, you could allow that concurrent further division of those lots so that we can have lots that can be sold fee simple. Otherwise, if we have duplexes and triplexes on a single lot, that can only be rented out. We want to see more home ownership opportunities and some more flexibility there. I think there could be helpful. So I'm rushing, trying to get through my 3 minutes. So thank you. I realize you haven't even gotten to those topics yet, but hopefully that's some food for thought as the discussion ensues.
Great, thank you. Next we have Steve Anderson. If you'd state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, Steve Anderson, 3240 Geller Road Northwest, West Salem Neighborhood Association Land Use Chair. First off, we're looking at a 20-year planning horizon, so I think flexibility is a key issue, and how far will Salem move, because organizational change requires people to abandon old habits. And so how far can we push or incentivize this, I think, is a good discussion. Question one, I like the idea of 65 to 70 feet. I think that we need to keep that flexible, not have it a single, but some flexibility there. And the issue is solar radiation and impacts on the ability to have solar generation from other surrounding properties. The sun is a common property resource, and to block it out is an issue. We had that discussion. Lisa was very helpful in the mixed use zone along Edgewater, where we had a residential issue, but protecting the ability for people to have access to the sun. Number two, I agree with Councilor Hoy, a quarter mile is too much. Maybe a 2-block walk in the rain Oregon model might make more sense. But I think the other issue is in terms of parking. I think, can we incentivize charging stations and electrical vehicles? You know, not just getting people out of their cars, but there's an interim step of going to electrical vehicles. So is that parking and transit? Can we incentivize the issue of electric vehicles in those parking spaces versus gas powered? And the issue, we've got ADA issues and we've got an aging population. So there are going to have to be some parking available because, you know, a lot of handicapped people and older people cannot ride the bus. And a key variable here is the commuter traffic. There's an unintended question here and consequences that big impact in Oregon and Salem, particularly is commuter, and the, you know, over 65% of Oregon's traffic is in Salem's traffic is commuter. So we need to balance that here. This is a two-dimensional conversation so far as what I've listened to. So we need to be more three-dimensional. As far as number three, 15-acre minimum makes a sense in terms of transit. Portland's having problems now with higher density because of the virus. More people are working from home. They want an extra place for an office. and have a place. And so larger apartments, so we need to not impact this such that we can't have in our development larger apartments, because more people are going to be working from home. I've consulted for 30 years, and this is part of the house, but it is an office that was designed when we built the house. And just an FYI, this is single family and it's carbon neutral, but that's by design. But I think we should have this throughout Salem. We have a project going in on West Salem out at Brush College, multifamily, commercial development. And as we work with that and the developer, there are trails. So there's an area for denser, less dense, mixed dense, but some flexibility there, because the walkability in some of these higher density units is lost. So those would be my general comments. And then for you, Councillor Phillips, I would like to have a conversation I have with a lot of my clients, how to make hard decisions under uncertainty. And when I worked with the US government after 9/11 in charge of all the US supply chains, those are hard decisions and you don't know the answers. So I smile when you say that. So those are my general comments. Appreciate the conversation. And I think staff could come back with some ideas to maintain flexibility and provide some options to support electrical vehicles. And I'll leave it there.
Our final public comment is from Bob Courtwright. Bob, I think I need to, if you would unmute your microphone and turn on your camera. Then state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, I know I'm unmuted. I'm not sure if my camera is there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. That's fine.
Okay, here's starting the video. You do want to see my backdrop. So my name is Bob Courtwright. I live in West Salem. And I'm really thrilled to talk to you today. I was particularly inspired by your extensive conversation about parking, because parking and parking reform is something that we talk too little about and is really critical to achieving our mixed use objectives. But what I want you to think about is how we provide parking, because yes, we want less parking, but the reality is we're going to continue to drive for most of our trips, or lots of people will. And we want people who arrive by car to conveniently walk to places. And it's especially important in mixed use development that people be able to walk around. And I think the thing that I would encourage you to look at is use of streets, on-street parking. And that gets to the second point that I wanted to get to, which is that we should be relooking at our street standards to make sure that we provide streets that are suitable for supporting walkable mixed-use development. And that means redesigning streets with shorter blocks. Our current block standard allows streets up to, or blocks up to 600 feet long. We really need shorter blocks to create the kind of network of mixed-use development and to create ways for people to get around. And we need to think about how we design those streets so that also so that they include on-street parking. It's an effective way that we can provide the parking that development will need without using up land that could be better developed for other purposes. And that's really essential in a couple of ways. Sharing parking among uses reduces the overall need for parking. Our current model is each use, as you know, provides its own parking. And as a result, we end up providing more than everybody needs collectively. So providing streets that build in parking is a way in mixed use areas that we can kill two birds with one stone. We can really create benefits by creating a better walkable environment. Those on-street parking buffers pedestrians from the street. It helps slow traffic. And we should provide and design those streets in a way that encourages walking and redevelopment. So I think those are two really essential things for you to think of as we look at ways that we can change the zoning code to promote mixed-use development. Thanks.
And that is all our public comment.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Does anyone want to respond or have any questions or final comments before we end in 5 minutes? And I failed to mention Norman Wright, Community Development Director, is here. I apologize.
That's okay, Eunice. I introduced myself earlier too. We're
Okay.
good.
Any members of the subcommittee have any final thoughts? I think we had pretty good direction to kind of bring more detail back on the first three options at our next meeting in May. And then if we have time, we'll kind of high level the rest of them to see again kind of where we want to go. I do recognize some of those public comments were related to options we didn't get to, but we will get to them. Commissioner Pollack.
Well, I guess my final comment is that we have that the Salem plant has goals to reduce the greenhouse gases, and sometimes the comments you're receiving, not in my backyard, the NIMBY comments. I mean, that's what we get when we're trying to achieve our housing needs. It's going to come when we're trying to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. There is, and I've said this a lot of time, there's a balance of hardships, but if we delaying issues regarding greenhouse gas, it's no longer an option. We're going to have to be pushed. We're going to have to be forceful. We're going to have to be groundbreaking. And sometimes, again, weighing the hardships, can you breathe better? Or do you have a view? I mean, there's going to be some hard choices, but we have some goals, and the whole idea of this subcommittee is to keep those goals in mind when we make these comments. I just want to make it's the goals motivate us, should always motivate us, because they're for a positive health benefit. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Anyone else have any comments? Lisa, did you want to say anything before we wrapped up?
I just want to say I really appreciate all the comments, and I thought this was really fun, and I hope it wasn't too tedious for all of you, but usually when I'm before the council or the commission, it's about a very specific property and very specific criteria. So it was enjoyable to have a broader conversation and get all this input. So thank you all for being on the committee, and hopefully we don't overwhelm you, because there's still a lot more to talk about, but I thought it was a good first start. So thank you very much.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say thank you to everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. When I first started talking with the city manager and the mayor about this committee, I thought, this could be a really good opportunity for us to really dive deep into some of these issues that we don't get to dive deep into on city council. And I thought having the mix of planning commissioners and city councils together to kind of bring our knowledge up together and share experiences and share perspectives, because we each come at this from a little bit different place depending on our role. I thought it could be really valuable to help inform council and the planning commission as we get ready to move forward with our Salem, because it's like I've told people for a long time, our Salem is probably the most consequential thing we'll do on city council during our terms. I mean, I think it's in terms of long-term impact on the city. And I think the better we can do it and the more informed we can be as we're making those decisions, the better. And so I really appreciate everybody being here. I've learned a lot today, and I'm looking forward to the next meeting. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the discussion. And we will see you May, should have had that memorized, maybe the 27th perhaps. We'll send that out. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.